All right, welcome everybody to the Total BS Show. I'm Levi Stevenson.
And I'm Derek Bible Cheese.
We're here to bring you the show designed to make politics something worth talking about again. And funny enough, this week we are not actually talking about politics necessarily.
Well, we kind of are. We're gonna kind of give a base of maybe political rhetoric and kind of what we see has been going on.
Yeah. So, want to get right into it?
Well, I think first off we should
Oh yeah,
show
we
off our
should
new
do. We
swag.
should. We got some new Total BS Show T-shirts. They will soon be available for purchase. I'll see if I can get around the mic. Yeah, so you can get some cool Total BS Show
Check
T-shirts.
out that.
We'll have
Looking
some.
good.
We'll have some swag available at some point. They're very comfortable T-shirts.
They are. They
they're-
fit really well.
Yeah.
Shoulders,
They're
arms.
they're nice T-shirts. So we'll have those available at some point or another, and well, we'll amount to the Total BS shop, which is not currently set up, but we will have it at some point.
At some point.
Hopefully in the near future. So yeah, we'll have some of that available for you. But
And I think we got a couple of follow-ups.
yes, we
right?
do. Let's do a couple follow-ups to what we had. So last time, if you remember, we talked about the Iowa the derecho storm, as well as we talked a little bit about mail-in ballots and absentee voting and things like that. And so as kind of a follow-up to the the derecho. Kim Reynolds did have some comments last week, kind of talking about how, because there was some confusion, I guess, as to exactly when the application was submitted to get funding relief, and then when President Trump actually approved some of this. I think there was some confusion. And actually, it's interesting. Like the application for FEMA money is kind of a whole process in its own. You could almost do like a whole show on it because it's so involved and it takes so long to do. Like for a hurricanes, or not hurricane, because hurricanes you know ahead of time, but like a lot of natural disasters, it's not uncommon for them to take months and months and months to even apply for this FEMA relief money.
Well, and I think they had similar issues with some of the COVID relief money, did they not? Where some of the paperwork was alleged to be
Right.
very extensive.
It wouldn't surprise. I guess I'm not sure 100% on that, but it wouldn't surprise me at all. But I was talking about because Trump had visited Iowa very briefly. It was like it was only for like a half an hour or something like that. And he just stayed on the tarmac, didn't look at any of the damage. But he did approve like $45 million in federal aid about a week after the storm, which was, I think it might have been the same day that the application was submitted. And for a storm that came out of nowhere, getting the application submitted in a week is actually not too bad, honestly.
That's pretty good.
That's a pretty good turnaround, actually. I mean, I know it sounds like a long time, you had a whole week to get this in. It's like I know it does sound like a long time in like when you're looking at it in hindsight, but it's not quite so simple.
Well, I'll tell you what, I've worked in government, and it's a wheel. It takes a while to get a paper.
Yeah, pretty much everything. And we do DOT work with the company that I work at, and just things with the government they just take a long time. Mm-hmm. And it's just, I mean, that's just what it is. I mean, some of it's by design, and some of it just kind of is.
Well, they got to go through their checks and balances and everything.
You got to double, triple, quadruple check everything, and then the checklist has to get signed off and inspected, and it's a whole deal. But either way, that's kind of a brief little follow up to that. And then there was also actually an interesting follow up to the mail-in ballots as well. Was it in New Jersey?
Yeah, the New Jersey election, the one that was actually kind of made some news lately about they were going to do, I believe, all mail-in ballots due to COVID, and a judge actually ordered a new election. It was determined that 19% of all ballots received were fraudulent. Another report reported they found 800 ballots, I believe, that just were not even counted.
Wow.
What
was the total? What was the total voter turnout for that?
I don't know. I didn't. That wasn't.
I wasn't sure. Like, is 800 what kind of percentage of the total vote is it? Wait, what? I guess what was the election?
The election was a city council race.
Oh, so it probably wasn't very many votes. Like, it probably wasn't.
Yeah, 800 is Yeah,
Yeah,
800 probably is a pretty decent. Well, it said 19%. 19%
well, 19%
of
enough.
all ballots received were fraudulent, and I don't know what the number of the 800 would represent. Um, it was, I believe, both people got cited for voter fraud, which
Interesting.
was, yeah, sitting.
It's not
The
not a good
race's
look.
apparent winner, the race's apparent winner, and sitting councilmen were charged with voter fraud.
That's not.
So it doesn't. So we have what was it? Wisconsin. Wisconsin was uh, kind of said to be impossible to do votes through massive mail-in ballot because
Right.
there's no way to properly police it. We said that last week with Justice Ginsburg and Governor Cuomo stating that they were both against it because you could not possibly police it properly.
Mm-hmm.
And then now you fast forward 4 or 5 months later, and it seems like the political left is all of a sudden for just these massive mail-in ballots, and they're having trouble with city council races. So
Yeah, that's a really small sample too. I mean, it's not like it's hundreds of thousands of people or anything like that. I mean, or I guess maybe it is, but I I don't know how big a city this was in, but
it's just weird. It's just weird that back in April, everybody they were against the mail-in ballots because of this concern, and now it seems like half the people are for them, half the people are against them. There's a lot of rhetoric being thrown around back and forth.
yeah. Unfortunately, I
And
think it almost seems like because the argument both for and against it is like highly political. So it's not like
absolutely,
so it's it's a tough one because it's not like you're talking about I don't know something inconsequential like which football player is better, who's the better quarterback or something like that. It's not something like that wherever it's
yeah.
it's inconsequential.
There's not a lot of analytics behind it,
Right. Yeah,
yet
there's not a lot of way to back up whatever you're trying to say. Like it's almost entirely based in theory.
Now, USA Today wrote the New Jersey ballot fraud case. They acknowledged it was a fraud case. Doesn't signal national trouble with vote by mail. They kind of go, but again, a lot of this is politically motivated. It's politically based. So I'm my personal opinion.
Mm-hmm.
We have a process. You show up. I think you should show an ID, one person, one vote. I don't personally think there's any question that should be a thing. It's the way that, elections have gone forever. And now all of a sudden there's this big push for just massive mail-in ballots, not absentee ballots, massive mail-in ballots. Especially kind of odd and concerning to me, like that all of a sudden this is one of the most controversial elections, presidential elections we've had in a long time,
Right.
a very long time, maybe ever, and all of a sudden now it's coming up. I got an idea. Let's entertain the idea or the concept of massive mail-in ballots, and we will start with the 2024 election, or we'll start on a smaller scale with local elections and just see how it works out. But to jump right in and start with the presidential election.
Yeah, it seems like you'd want to do some sort of smaller. You'd want to do some smaller stuff. Now, I do know that it's like Washington, Oregon, Wyoming, and maybe another state that they already do optional universal mail-in voting for every presidential election. Like they already do mail-in voting.
What kind of? I wonder. It would be interesting to know how that works.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I just happened to skim past a graphic on it maybe earlier this week or something like that, and I didn't look into it too far. I was happy to be busy at the time.
Because there's confusion between the what they're calling massive mail-in ballots and the absentee ballots.
Right. So yeah, I'm not sure. I'd have to look into that a little bit more, but yeah. So it's kind of interesting because even it seems like in small sample sizes and in small experiments, it's hit and miss.
Well, yeah, it seems to be a disaster. And maybe there's a lot out there because you don't get, probably one of the problems with today's uh, polarized, divisive political atmosphere is you don't get a whole lot of the positive.
Right.
You don't get a whole lot of like, oh, well, hey, we've been doing this for decades and it works just fine, and
Yeah.
here's how we do it. So who knows? It doesn't seem like it's been massively successful. And even when you look at the divisiveness on it, or the political divide on it, you could go back to April, and the people that are for it now were clearly against it then. So there seems to be even kind of divisiveness amongst the people that are creating division on the topic itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and part of it too is that a lot of it ends up tracking back to social media too, especially Twitter, where the culture around and the conversation on Twitter revolves almost entirely around trying to score points on people, basically trying
It
to
does.
about basically trying to dunk on people, for to use a kind of a colloquialism, is to just try to whoever you're talking with about something is just to try to slam some fact or some phrase or some quote or whatever, um, on somebody with the intent of just ruining them, or of scoring cheap points basically, and trying to make them look stupid.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that falls back to we live in a atmosphere right now, and hopefully this gets better. I think everything has its peak, right? Everything has its peak. When you look back in history, the stock market will have its peak. COVID-19 will have its peak. People who can throw a football the farthest will have its peak.
Mm.
Whatever it is. When you look back in history, everything has a peak. You never know what that's going to be until you look back, and then even then, everything can always get beaten. But hopefully, we're at or close to kind of like this peak divisiveness where people are the first thing that they try to do in any sort of interaction is to try to defame you on something like a gotcha moment. Like, he said this, so he said X, he must be Y. Therefore, nothing he says throughout time is relevant. And it's like people don't debate anymore. They don't, they're not good at it. They don't enjoy it. They're sensitive to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope, I hope that we can get back to where we can have civil discourse at this point across the broad spectrum of what is America is probably a lot to ask for, but I hope we can get back to where you can at least have debates without someone trying to just defame you and slander you, or trying to burn you down. It's just like,
Yeah,
really?
it's gotten to the point where a lot of people's their first mechanism, the first thing they try is you have to try to personally insult them,
Mm-hmm.
instead of talking through things, and it's a really toxic culture, and that's unfortunately that's just the way
It
Twitter
is.
is. Facebook is kind of that way too. Facebook is definitely that way, and
At Facebook is really that way. And I tell
Facebook
you
is
what,
definitely that. Yeah.
since I've been in this for as long as I have, I've learned to not only just kind of ignore it. I used to get baited into it every now and then. I used to get baited into a lot, like probably 10 years ago. When you're just like, where's this guy coming from? All right, well, you want
Right.
to talk about me? I'll talk about you.
Right.
But I quickly learned that doesn't do anything. It doesn't go anywhere, and I just call them out on it. Your personal attacks mean nothing to me. They don't mean anything in my life, but you have to resort yourself to personal attacks. Either debate the topic or just please leave. Just please leave. There's no room for personal attacks. And I heard Colin Cowherd say this once, and I don't know if you could like Colin Cowherd, you could not like Colin
Sometimes he
Cowherd.
does
It's
drop
irrelevant.
some interesting wisdom nuggets.
The thing I like about him is he is very, very analytically based.
Yeah.
He says some stuff, and
Yeah, you can. Sure about that one, Colin?
you're gonna double down on that one. But
Yeah.
and I remember when he brought out his Peyton Manning, Tom Brady. But he brought out the numbers. He said these are the numbers. can like who you want, but these are the numbers. But what he said was, and it was in sports, I think it was actually in reference to replay, but it's a universal statement. And what he said was, you should worry about getting it right, not being right. So don't worry about being right. Don't worry. Don't let your ego guide the narrative. Worry about getting down to what is correct. What is analytically, what is truthfully, what is correct? What is the base correct information that we should be going off of? Right. You know, don't worry about being right. Being right is it speaks to your ego. You know, it speaks to megalomaniacs. It speaks to you know, maybe micromanagers. You know, worry about getting it right.
Right. Yeah.
You know, and that speaks a lot to our topic today. And I wanted to talk. I wanted to build a foundation of kind of. I know this is very much how I think. I think that anybody that knows me would go, yeah, that's spot on. And I'm pretty sure this is along the lines of how you think too. Just how you try to formulate, how your thought process works, and how you try to formulate and break down information and get from A to B. And I want to talk about ethos, pathos, and logos. Okay, so these are persuasive techniques. These are how you try to present a topic, how you try to convince someone. So ethos is the ethical appeal, and it means to convince an audience of the author's credibility or character. Pathos is the emotional appeal, and it means to persuade an audience by appealing to their emotions. And logos is the appeal to logic. It means to convince an audience by use of logic or reason. So I've thought about this a lot. I've got a good friend of mine, and we get into all kinds of really good topics. He's really pretty well versed in psychology, sociology. He speaks about this all the time, and it took me forever to question him on what are you talking about, dude? I mean, I heard him say this. He goes, "Oh, this is ethos driven. This is pathos driven. This is logos driven." And I kind of just, you know, sometimes when you get into conversations, you don't want to. Again, your ego steps in, and you don't want to feel stupid. You don't want to look stupid, you know. Right. So you just kind of, oh yeah. I mean, everybody's been there. Everybody's did the whole, oh yeah, I know what you mean. So one day I just said, what are you talking about? And we had this a good conversation about exactly what these persuasive techniques are and how they're used. And it quickly just dawned on me. This is what drives the foundation of our politics. This is what drives the foundation of our communication. This is what drives the foundation of, you know, as it says, this is what drives the foundation of our persuasion. These are the techniques that people use. And what I've noticed is, in my opinion, how I think, logos appeals to the logic and reason. Almost everything political, especially as you get higher, as you move from local to state to federal, everything has to pass a certain check, a certain like mental check or a certain reason check. And the way I look at things, the way I feel is, to me, logos is the most logical check to be a leading edge check. Logical, reasonable. For example, we touched on policies, I think a few shows ago. Right. You know, I don't remember if we touched on that on Sunday or if that was one of our other pre-recorded shows. But you govern with policy, and when you're trying to govern 330 million people, you have to prioritize these methods correctly, I think.
Yeah.
Or you end up backwards, like really fast. So logos, logic and reason. Is the policy that I'm putting forth, is it logical? Is it reasonable? Is what I've designed the policy to do going to achieve what I wanted to achieve. And then after that, after you decide whether it's logical or reasonable, I think you move to ethos. You move into the ethos step of your progression. You figure out if it's credible and ethical. Now, the first two steps, by and large, you can do by yourself or with a small group or a small team or an administration or whatever you want to, whatever system you're in or whatever atmosphere you're in. But the ethos step, is it credible? Have I kind of bounced this idea back and forth with people I trust, people that are knowledgeable, subject matter experts? And is it ethical? Does it seek to harm large groups of people? I don't think any policy should seek to harm anyone.
Well, right.
But there's unintended consequences to every single policy.
If it did seek to harm a specific group of people, then that would be a violation of the Constitution.
It'd be unethical. Unethical, absolutely. Once you find out to where it actually seeks to harm any group, it's unethical, and you have to go back and start over again. And then your follow-up, your trailing edge indicator, or what I like to say, your feedback tool, should be your pathos. Your pathos. Does it appeal to the emotions and the feelings of the targeted audience? Now, this one is very subjective, because when you're dealing with
depends on your audience.
Household, absolutely. And when I like to break everything down to a household and start from there, I like to start to see if it passes certain checks in a household. So when you get down to pathos, if you're dealing with a household, does it appeal to the emotions and feelings of those in the household? That's a very easy check. That's simple. On the level of like a town, 10,000 people, a city, 20, 50,000 people, it's still a pretty easy check. Most towns, most cities, when you start to get under 50,000, have very similar demographics, just simply because of geography for the most part.
Right.
Still relatively simple. When you get into larger cities, state level, that becomes very difficult. And then when you get to the federal level, I mean, you're trying to pass a emotional and feeling check on 330 million people. That's impossible. I mean, you should be trying to, because even in our country, they say, oh, we had a million people, signed a document against this. Okay. A million people as a whole number, that's a lot of people. But when bumped into 330 million people is not that high of a percent.
Right.
Almost negligible. So that's how I look at stuff. That's how I engage stuff. I think politically, the thought process of the persuasive techniques is very relevant. I think that there was possibly a day when that's how the thought process went.
Right.
And I think all that changed.
Well, we try to capture pathos through polling data and stuff like that too, but even that's not reliable if you're trying to use that measure, really.
Well, it depends on who you're polling. That's true. Does the sample actually represent the collective? It's because you get polls that are 2,000 like-minded people, but there's only 4,000 people out of 100 that think that way.
Right.
So
you just happen to get the one group that's just like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you have, there's subjective polling, where I see a lot of news outlets, they have their polls. Well, I mean, who do you think is going to be readily available, sign up for, hold their hand up for like a Fox News poll? Probably people that are pro Fox News. Mm-hmm. Fox News allegedly has a right-wing political lean. So who are you getting? CNN. Who are you going to get with a CNN poll? Who are you going to get with PolitiFact? Who are you going to get with any of these polls? It's just
right.
difficult to tell. But I think this is unfortunate. I think that we've shifted really hard into this idea that pathos has now become our leading edge or leading edge tool of not only persuasive technique, but to drive policy, really. Because when they're trying to persuade massive amounts of people to get votes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those votes or those voters, allegedly or theoretically, are voting based on the rhetoric or the policies of the politician, right? So if the politician is throwing out a bunch of policies that heavily appeal to the emotions and feelings to try and garner votes, and even if they pass the credibility and ethics of Ethos, when they get around the logos, do they even work?
Right.
Do they even make sense? Are they reasonable? Because you also have these giant, once again, getting back to the Colin Cowherd, you need to worry about getting it right and stop worrying about being right. On both sides
and
of
being right, being an appeal to your ego would be an appeal to the pathos.
Absolutely. But both sides, both the right, both the left, they worry a lot about being right. They want to win. They don't, and a lot of times the American people suffer when this happens. They want to just win. So they create these think tanks, these groups of people that will somehow figure out how whatever policy they put out there or whatever they say or whatever they're telling the people is going to happen. They come up with a way to make that credible and make it ethical, even though there's no way it's going to pass logic and reason. There's no way. And I think on the low hanging fruit right now, because the low hanging fruit right now, because a Republican is in office. So there's a lot of kind of campaigning that's been going on the left, is the free insert whatever for all, right?
Sure.
Whether it's free healthcare or free education, it's kind of the low hanging fruit. So I'm just going to pick on it for a minute. How are they going to do that? The only answer is, nothing's for free.
It's an appeal to the pathos for sure.
It is.
Depending on who you talk to and depending on what your perspective is, possibly the ethos. But because if you believe that it is that healthcare is a human right, then it would be an appeal to the ethos.
Right, and
depending on your audience, basically.
Absolutely, and that's where they come up with these think tanks or these slogans, these campaign slogans. They can wrap that all up in a nice, credible, ethical package. So the ethos is the one that is kind of the ethos is very subjective, I think, because the ethos can be packaged up however you want it to sound ethical and credible. But then when they get over to the logos, and this is the question that they never answer. They dance around. They never answer. They get caught every now and then. Every now and then they get caught. How are you going to pay for it? Well, the answer is they're going to raise taxes. That's what the question.
That's what always the question. That's the question always is. Even if you look in that, that's the question that always comes from. Even I think it was Jake Tapper asked Bernie Sanders about it. Even from outlets that would at least allegedly lean more left. Or that made people think lean left or lean, would still ask the logos question there, which is how do you fund something like this? You've checked the pathos box, you've probably checked the ethos box with anybody that you care to appease, and now does it check the logos box? And it's kind of funny because the logos box, it's both subjective and unmoving, because logic is logic. Well, like numbers are numbers and logic is logic, but you can be working on two totally different planes of context in how you put your numbers together, so that even the logos can change you a little bit between contexts or between audiences.
It could change a little bit. It depends on but logos is, like you said, logos is locked in to a question has an answer. Logos is logic and reason. You can kind of waver a little bit on, is it logical or reasonable? I mean, you can get some really, really creative people to make something logical, but
Mm-hmm.
in the question of the free X for Y, the logical question is, or the reasonable question is, well, how are you going to pay for it? Well, that question has to be answered.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the answer can be the answer can vary,
Sure.
but it still has to be paid for. I think maybe, and you can help me out with this a little bit. Maybe a similar trap on the right is, the right tends to want to reduce taxes all the time.
Right.
So, well, when you reduce taxes, there are certain things in government that have to get paid for. So, who do you reduce taxes on? How do you reduce taxes? How do you continue to pay for the system that we have?
Right.
Stuff needs paid for. So you either have to come up with alternatives to pay for it, or you have to cut it. That's basic economics. It's money in, money out.
It tends to work in the opposite direction, where it tries to start the logos, and then you have to make it through the ethos and the pathos. Unfortunately, from the right, you see a lot of times where they hit the logos, and it probably hits at least most of the ethos, and then they ignore the pathos, and then it becomes a wildly unpopular idea, or something that is unpopular. And so that's where it comes with on the political end of it, is that they don't always check the pathos box. So some things can be very unpopular if they don't hit that pathos box.
The pathos, and this is the way I look at it, and I think this is the way a lot of I don't necessarily want to say Republicans maybe, but conservatives for sure. Pathos is naturally, and this is just the way I look at it, if you effectively try to use this triangle and try to connect all these dots, or not connect all these dots, but check all these boxes, the pathos is inherently a feedback tool.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas you're not necessarily trying to check a box by making people feel good. You're trying to put forth a policy that is credible and ethical, logical, reasonable, will work. Mm-hmm. Now, if you do it and a year goes down the road and it is absolutely just wildly unpopular, then you have to go back and say, well, it works, but everybody hates it.
Right.
Everybody hates it. So we got to
figure out why they hate it, and then you have to retool it to try to check those pathos check boxes.
Yeah, and I think if you follow that line of thinking, I think you can eventually because you already know that it's logical and reasonable. You already know that it's credible and ethical. It's just not very popular. And now you got to figure out why. But once you figure out why, you can begin to really troubleshoot it and tune it up, and you can really make it into something that works. Whereas I think if you try to lead with pathos and you try to make sure that everybody's happy and it appeals to everybody, or it appeals to your voter base, or it appeals to just enough people to keep your job.
So
I don't think you can tune that up.
You know what what did just kind of cross my mind a little bit, though, that it does bolster my logos is subjective in interpretation. Is what is the current argument for socialism or communism in its modern time? Basically, it's that it's for the people and all this, and that it hasn't been tried before properly. So for socialists or communists or whatever they're fighting for them, it checks their logos box. It doesn't check the logos box for other people, but it checks their logos box. And for them, it also checks an ethos box, because they say it's ethical that we should give the ownership of private companies to the lowest level employees and give everybody a totally equal share. So that would check an ethos box. So you've got logos and ethos checked. Now, and where then the battle becomes your pathos, and then making socialism or communism a popular idea, which is that's a pathos problem. So it's kind of interesting because, as you said before, on some things, the left starts on the pathos end and then works their way to the logos end. But from that issue, which is becoming more prevalent, I would say, going forward. And especially we see like young people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who's she's a democratic socialist, young. You see a lot of young people in the Democratic Party kind of moving that direction. The method to if they want to try to go to full on democratic socialism, the method to get there is actually a logos to pathos journey, where they believe that they've already got the logos and the ethos boxes checked, and now they have to get the pathos box checked.
Yeah, let me jump in here. So I think you're correct. I think you're absolutely correct with how they view it. I think the problem is how they view it is in theory. In theory, the theory of socialism, the theory of democratic socialism checks the logic and reason. The theory of socialism, the theory of democratic socialism checks the credibility. But what you have to eventually get to the implementation. And this is where it falls apart. Like the questions, I saw an interview where they were asking Bernie Sanders about how are you going to pay for it? You have to implement it, and it has to work. And I think that's where a lot of Americans are very, very, very productive. They're production driven.
Yeah.
They're very production driven. And you can read article after article after article until you're sick to death of kind of this European model that a lot of Americans look to without really understanding most of the European models and how they work. But this European model of work and work ethic, and I think, what is it, like France has like a 30-hour or 32-hour work week or something like that. And a lot of these foreign countries, a lot of these European countries look over here to the United States and they're like, wow, you guys just work yourselves to death. You guys are just like mental on production. But a lot of Americans are geared that way. So what drives me nuts, and I was looking for a video earlier of just a story I wanted to catch up on and see something on. I was trying to look for a video of what happened, right? And I couldn't get a video I couldn't find a video of I just want to see what happened. I don't want to see CNN spin or Fox's spin or Washington Post spin. I just want to see the video. I don't want to see a clip. I don't want to see two clips where there's a bunch of stuff missing.
Yep.
I just want to see the whole thing. So
you have to go find clips from a bunch of different news sources and then eventually splice them all together yourself.
Yeah, and it's mind-boggling, and that's frustrating. It's frustrating because essentially it's some rich person, a television outlet, television studio, mainstream media, trying to spoon feed me some narrative that I'm not sold on because I just want to see what happened. I just want to see what happened, and I think when you get down to it, we could talk about theories all day long. Americans want to see how are you going to implement this thing. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's say democratic socialism. Let's say it hasn't been done right. Let's just assume that it hasn't, for argument's sake, and let's just assume that Americans can do it right. I don't have a lot of faith in that because I like to trust history. But let's assume that that everything is laid out. Then show it to me. Explain to me the implementation of how this is going to go. How this is going to go. What do I get? What's my cut? What's the average American's cut? How does my life get better? What's it cost me? What are the trade-offs? I think I like to listen to Thomas Sowell a lot. And I think he said, the difference between this side and that side is, life is made up of a bunch of trade-offs. One side understands that life is a bunch of trade-offs. When you go to work, you are trading your time for money. And in turn, you can take that money and trade it for other goods and services. I mean, that is just cut all the way down basic economics. Mm-hmm. And that's life. Life is a trade-off. If you want to do a podcast, you're not going to be able to go do other things, right? So people understand that. People understand that life is a trade-off, I think. I think a lot of people do. And when they try to push this narrative from the back end to the front, and they're telling people that they're going to be entitled to a bunch of free stuff, that sounds great. But where's the trade-off for the free stuff? Show me the implementation. I understand the theory. I get the theory. Logos, logic, reason, the theory checks. Okay, sure. Ethos, credibility, ethics, theory still checks. I got it. It's a theory. Theories are very, very, broad. But we have to implement this at some point if it's to be successful. If one side thinks that this is going to make it a good go, it has to be implemented. Okay,
And that's where the logos comes in. Is you get as soon as you have to start, as soon as you start listing everything out one by one, and
it falls apart.
This is what this is. This is what this is. Well, it has.
It doesn't fall apart. It takes on a whole different meaning when people are presented with the trade-offs.
It becomes its own animal that you have to really. There are some things that you have to confront when you're doing your logos part of that exercise. But it's interesting though, because I think right now they are taking the logos to pathos path, with as far as presenting democratic socialism to the larger American public as something that a growing number of people would like to switch to.
See, I disagree. I think they're taking it pathos to logos. I think that they're trying to appeal to people's emotions and feelings by saying,
I think they think
life is going to be.
I think they think they're going logos to pathos.
Oh, okay, I got you. Yeah, I would agree with that. I absolutely.
I think a lot of people think they go logos to pathos because they conflate they conflate pathos and logos in that the pathos fulfills the logos. If you can make it popular and make people happy, then that fulfills your logical equation.
I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think also that there's a big conflation in the subject matter and the target audience, in that when I handled projects in a past life, right? And what I always told people is, I don't care about me. I don't care about the owner, so to speak. And it's not that I don't care. It's that I'm not focused on me. I'm not focused on the owner. I'm focused on the project. Because if the project is successful, the owner is happy, I'm happy, he got a good product, I made some money, and we can continue to do business. We have a successful relationship. I was always focused on the project. I think a lot of times in the pathos, they try to appeal to the people, the emotion of the people, or they try to appeal with the logic and the reason of the people. How about that? They attack their logos by assuming that they're supposed to appeal to the logic and the reason of the audience. And that couldn't be further from the truth. They need to appeal to the logic and the reason of the subject matter. They need to appeal to the logic and the reason of, in this case, it would be democratic socialism. Does democratic socialism pass the logic and reason test? Not necessarily do the people accept it. Is it logical to the people? Is it acceptable? Is it reasonable to the people?
Yeah. It's who do you think has to fulfill that logos test? Is it or who or what, and then who or what does your ethos apply to? And it's all when you are working through this progression for whatever idea it is you're working your way through or you're talking through, you have to establish a context for whatever you're looking at. And if you don't have context of whatever you're talking about, then your logos, ethos, and pathos can change, and they can change context sometimes without you knowing, and you want to keep them grounded as best you can. So you have to establish your context, and you have to establish your frame of perspective, so that way you can keep everything pretty narrow and understand how you're discussing things without it ever leaving your intended context.
Yeah, so I think a lot in what we're doing with this project, and a lot of where we're going to go when we start to get into our news, current events, political topics, especially political topics. We are going to analyze these topics from a logos, ethos, pathos. We're gonna focus a lot on logos. Um, we're gonna focus a lot on just facts, logic, reason. Uh, we're gonna get into a little bit of the other two, but uh, I think it's fair to say that I think it's a disservice to present things from a pathos driven point of view. And I don't. I think we're going to try to stay away from that. And I think, honestly, I think in the political spectrum, I think the more we can get away from the rhetoric of a pathos driven society, and start to really focus on just this subject matters. Focus on, is it good? Is it bad? Is it logical? Is it reasonable? And just kind of, we got to get away from the rhetoric. We've got to get away from, well, this is what we should do because we don't like that guy. Okay, well, you not liking someone else has nothing to do with, is the policy going to be good for the people or not? So that's just kind of my take.
Yeah. No, and I think that's the best way to approach this going forward is because it's something that's the best way that we can keep it as objective as we can. There will be times where we may introduce our own perspective, our own interpretation of things, and then that's where you're going to get into your ethos and pathos. But a lot of times we are also interpreting the logos part of this too. So that was a lot of Greek for one episode. Didn't probably more, or is it Latin? Is it Latin or Greek? Which one? That should be Greek.
I couldn't say. I think it should be Greek.
Pathos that's a Greek word. So that's a lot more Greek. I think we were anticipating on putting in a show like this, but that's all right. So I hope everybody enjoyed this week's show. This has been the Total BS Show. I'm Levi Stevenson.
Derek Cheese.
And everybody, remember to do your own research. Question everything. Trust nothing. And until next time, everything is total BS.